Hello folks, it's me, DeMontropolis, and I am finally ready to talk about Super Mario Bros. The Lost Levels, originally released in 1986 for the Famicom. Known as the infamous black sheep of the Super Mario franchise, this game is the original sequel to Super Mario Bros., known as Super Mario Bros. 2 in Japan. The developers of the first game believed that Japanese players had already mastered it and created the sequel with a much higher difficulty in mind. For Super players was even advertised to dissuade newcomers. When evaluated for release outside of Japan, Nintendo of America deemed this game way too difficult and frustrating for a recovering market, even surpassing what was known as Nintendo Hard, and declined its international release. Sounds quite scary, doesn't it? As such, it was only until 1993 did this game get released internationally through the Super NES compilation Super Mario All-Stars, where the game was renamed as The Lost Levels for the first time. Pretty cool title given the game's history. I spent a lot of time playing the game and trying to learn everything I could, and while I have not beaten a Deathless, and I probably never will, I will do my best to evaluate as much as I can. And now, it's time to explore the lost levels of Super Mario Bros. Let's get this out of the way. The Lost Levels overall feels like an expansion pack rather than a true sequel, and I mean that in the sense that when it comes to content, progression, presentation, story, and the overall gameplay loop, it's almost exactly the same as the first game. There are some new stuff here and there, but in terms of innovation, there really isn't any. This even applies to the music, having the exact same OST as the first game. Don't get me wrong, I praised the OST before, but its complete recyclement is lazy for what is intended to be a direct sequel. The only exception is the ending theme, but I will talk about that later. And because of this expansion pack feeling, almost none of the first game's flaws were fixed here. The inability to scroll the screen back, the immediate acceleration, overall samey feel to the levels, the list goes on. So, like it or not, you'll have to get used to it. The graphics are slightly better overall while distancing itself from the first game's style. The ground is more textured, moving platforms were changed from metallic to mushroomy, and the background elements, such as trees, clouds, bushes, and even the mushroom power-ups actually have eyes and faces, a visual design that has stuck with the franchise ever since. The two-player system of alternating across players has been removed, which does suck for those who enjoy that kind of back-and-forth gameplay, but it has been replaced with something I find more interesting. You can now choose between playing as Mario or Luigi at the start, and the brothers are separate in their gameplay, making the flow of the game pretty significant depending on your character. Mario has the standard controls from the first game, as while his traction is good in stabilizing his momentum and controlling how he lands, there are moments where you wish his jump was a little higher. Enter Luigi, whose higher jump can reach places not only more comfortably than Mario can, but some secrets are only accessible to Luigi. His downside is his worse traction, very easily slipping off platforms after a running jump and making it difficult to stop him in place. Areas where specific movements are required, such as World 2-4 and World 8-4, will be painful and almost frame perfect to time with Luigi. However, I think both characters are pretty balanced, as you will find situations where you can take advantage of their strengths and be forced to overcome their weaknesses. Definitely one of the highlights of the game. Now, the new obstacles and enemy types introduced in this game are pretty cool and help enhance the experience, even if by a small hair. The most iconic addition are poison mushrooms, which come out of blocks like with other power-ups, but actually hurt you, and it's a really fun way to keep players attentive to a power-up's appearance. Bloopers can now move along the air and even be stomped on, unlike the underwater sections where stomping is impossible. Starting with World 4, the green piranha plants are replaced with red ones, which are more aggressive, can attack even if you're standing next to their pipe, and get some cool uses in upside-down pipes. Lastly, and certainly my favorite, is wind. Although its appearance in a level is very sudden, wind simply pushes a player forward, allowing for greater jumps to be made, but also making it more difficult to control momentum, and some of the best sections in the game have wind fueling your adrenaline as you race forward. If there's one gimmick I don't like, it's green super springs. Unlike the regular red ones, which simply bounce you to the height of the screen, these ones launch you so high that you go off screen for several seconds. While it is fun to go whee and skip parts of a level, it is most obnoxious to actually stick the landing. Because you can only tell where your character will land by using the camera's scrolling speed, going backwards will halt the camera and cause you to lose track of where your character will fall. This is not only frustrating in areas with long pits to accidentally fall into, but it's especially difficult for the player to balance in levels that combine this gimmick with wind. Springs and super springs also seem to have a weird bug intrinsically tied to very specific instances. In World C3, one of the super springs had an odd chance to not even spawn, and since that whole level is built around using super springs, progression becomes impossible and a death is forced. This also happened once in World D2 to the only spring in the level, which is required to reach a high block in the air necessary to clear the level. I haven't managed to reproduce them, but these bugs do exist and can force a death upon you. Outside of these new additions, that's pretty much it. You get basically no new content that helps this game stand out from the first, and that's honestly a shame. I feel like if Lost Levels did take that step in innovation the same way that Super Mario Bros. 3 did later down the road, it probably would have been remembered more fondly. How difficult is this game? Some adjectives to describe the level design would be extremely punishing and sadistic. Everything is methodically calculated to cause undeserved punishment and sabotage your sanity. And as far as I know, this is the hardest Mario game ever made. It's so tough that it doesn't matter if you've beaten the first game deathless or even damageless. For super players is an understatement. Keep in mind that 2D Mario's foundation is a one-hit kill platformer, and the only way to armor against that is to find and eat super mushrooms. However, you'll be hard-pressed to learn that these super mushrooms are almost always tucked away in regular or hidden blocks. Like I said with the first game, the visual design can hide goodies in just about anything, which is taken to the extreme, as most mushrooms are discovered in regular blocks like needles in a haystack, with the hidden block locations being especially mind-boggling, to the point where most of them will keep you awake at night questioning to yourself, why? Thanks to the level design being as trial and error as is, random spawning enemies or obstacles like Bullet Bills, Cheep Cheeps, and Bowser's Fire Breath can become more aggravating to get killed by. You'll be committing to a full jump to the next platform, and BAM! You get smacked by something you couldn't react to or even anticipate. I will say though, whoever came up with adding the infinite one-up trick to the first levels, both World 1-1 and World A1, I'm really proud of your contribution. It's thanks to this one-up trick that I can at least beat the game without a game over, and not feel so guilty about dying so many times. However, you have to be careful not to rack up too many one-ups, because if you overstep this hidden limit, then you'll accidentally reset the counter back to 0. In one playthrough, I was just short of this limit, but with all the one-ups I was gaining, I somehow managed to hit the perfect sour spot where my first death ended up being my last. Hammer Bros are arguably the most difficult enemies to maneuver around, because of their spammy nature and being way more common here than in the first game. In Worlds 7 and 8, all Hammer Bros default to immediately chasing after you, which makes it extremely difficult to react and properly dodge their movements so you don't get hit. If you don't have any power-ups, your only options are to perform incredibly specific maneuvers tied to each Hammer Bro if you want to make it past them, be it running under them or jumping over them at the right altitude. Thankfully, you can actually hurt them with kicked shells this time around, a tactic I've found consistent use for in World 8-1. There's a Buzzy Beetle past a double-layered Bill Blaster, and if you move a bit further to the right, a Hammer Bro will start coming at you, making it a perfect opportunity to bounce the Buzzy Beetle shell off the Bill Blaster and into the Hammer Bro. It's a cool trick to pull off, and one of my favorites to do in the game. One good thing I like about Lost Levels is that there are even more secrets to discover than before. Secret pipes and beanstalks are more common across the game and give more chances to collect coins. Warp zones are even more ubiquitous, with the number of locations going from 3 to a whopping 11. It also helps that the warp zones now all have just one pipe instead of 3 pipes, which makes more sense to me, as normally with 3 worlds available, you'd always choose the world further ahead in the game. However, there's a really awful design choice done with warp zones, in that 2 of them actually send you back earlier in the game. This can be as far as either 2 worlds or 3 worlds of progression essentially being reset. The warp zone in World 3-1 even has a pit on the left, giving you the mean-spirited decision to either go back to the beginning of the game or kill yourself. A recurring element of level design starting with World 4 occurs in a lot of forced paratrooper jumps over large gaps. And when I mean large, I mean most of the time you won't actually see the paratrooper on screen until you keep walking back and forth on your platform in an effort to push the camera right so the paratrooper comes into view. And unlike future games, you can't control how high your character goes, bouncing off an enemy with the jump button, and it can make certain jumps for Mario feel agonizing because of this limitation, like the one in World 7-2. Thankfully, Lost Levels compensates for this somewhat because by default, you bounce off of enemies a little higher than before. And while I said you can't control how high you bounce with the jump button, there are other factors that can influence it, but they are difficult to master. Luigi gets more height than Mario, but more importantly, your current jump momentum adds onto your height. Say if you stomp an enemy while falling, you will only get the minimum height from a jump, but if you somehow stomp an enemy while ascending, that momentum carries over and you can get some serious air, allowing even Mario to reach the top of the screen with the correct jump. I would recommend trying to master this, however, because there is occasionally glitchy collision that may result in damage taken despite being above an enemy. Your foot can be touching a Koopa Troopa's eye and you'll get hurt. If a Cheep Cheep is not directly under your feet while you're standing, you'll also get hurt. Certain levels are designed in archaic ways, to the point where there are more mazes outside the castle levels than there are in the castle levels. World 5-3 and World 7-2 have ground levels that loop forever if you just keep going forward, and the only way to actually progress is to access a pipe in the sky, with paratrooper jumps. Both areas also have super mushrooms that can easily be respawned, thanks to the looping design of the level. World 8-2 is probably the most cryptic of all. You see this beanstalk coming out of that brick? That's not a secret. This is how you complete the level, as the flagpole is high up in the sky. The brick that holds this beanstalk also requires a paratrooper jump. And if you fail it, you'll have to bypass 2 Hammer Bros, who are not only on foot, but the barricades in the background hide poison mushrooms, a combo deliberately designed to punish the player for not taking that beanstalk or even knowing it exists. The levels World 7-4 and World C4 also have a potential softlock due to an oversight in the design. There's one section with multiple lifts in sequence, 5 to be exact. If you time your jump correctly, you can reach the high-up ceiling above everything. It looks like you could skip the level, just like you would in underground levels. And while you can, there is no drop-down to take you back into the level. So going up there and continuing means you will get stuck, with no way of backtracking or getting out of there, forcing you to wait until you die from running out of time. Due to the nature of level palettes changing up colors for sprites, this can make it hard to distinguish poison mushrooms from the other 2 mushrooms. They all share the same sprite, so the only difference to tell them apart is their color. And in the underground sections, the poison mushroom and 1-up mushroom are difficult to distinguish, even sharing some identical colors and blending so well that it's easy to mistake one for the other and vice versa. I thought these 2 1-up mushrooms in World 1-2 were poison mushrooms for the longest time until I actually collected them. I didn't really talk about underwater mechanics with the first game, as they felt a bit bland to me compared to other games' underwater sections, and didn't have secrets to look out for. Though thankfully them being the same in Lost Levels gives me a redemption of sorts. Basically you can swim anywhere on screen, and Mario thankfully breathes underwater, for some reason, though the lesser pressure prevents you from stomping enemies. There are also whirlpools that would try to suck Mario into a pit, and these were always telegraphed by bottomless pits. However, certain water levels in this game don't have whirlpools in all the pits, removing that telegraph and making it difficult to anticipate. World 6-2 can especially be rough thanks to this, as there are many areas with a low ceiling for you to bonk your head on, and if you get sucked too low down the screen, your jump input falters. One of my worst experiences came from trying to beat World 8-3 for the first time without a power-up. While I can and have beaten this level without dying, getting through on my first play was such a miserable experience that I almost ran out of my infinite lives. It starts with a Lakitu that you should absolutely stomp, or he will harass you as you platform off a paratroopa onto dropping platforms. After a couple of red Koopas, you then have to outmaneuver 2 Hammer Bros who chase after you in a limited space. Although it looks open, the barricades have hidden bricks that wall you off from doing full jumps. Because of this, your only bet is to short hop over these Hammer Bros and pray they don't have a disjointed hammer right above their heads. After you get the second Hammer Bro off screen, you do get a Super Mushroom and a Beanstalk from hidden bricks, and even a star to let you plow through the next 2 Hammer Bros. But the final platforming challenge is especially tricky. The only way to reach the scale platforms above is by running off 2 blocks hidden in the barricade, and they're so high up that Mario is forced to make a running jump to gain extra height. The scales themselves are very small, and the final platform past them is practically off screen. Oh, poor Mario. And since World 8 retains the behavior of having no checkpoints, every death sends you back to the beginning to once again make it past those Hammer Bros. Then, at the final stretch of World 8-4, we get introduced to a lazy new villain, the blue palette swap that is Bowser's brother. Yes, Bowser has a brother.
Actually, that's never meant to be his brother.
You're back?
This blue faker is factually no different from the other fakers, and many sources deny your oafish claim of any brotherhood. Play Super Mario All-Stars and read up on the Super Smash Bros. Ultimate Tip. They have all the necessary proof to debunk your loose thread of a theory, which was so...
I don't know what that guy's problem is. Anyway, what makes this new character stand out is that his defeat from Fireballs doesn't release a lesser enemy, so he's a legitimate relative. Outside of being a blue Bowser in-game though, he has virtually no backstory, lore, or even an actual name for that matter. Wasted opportunity to give this game a bit more character. If you can beat the game without using warp zones, you do get a very nice reward with a secret world referred to as Fantasy World, or simply World 9. This is a rather trippy area with very short levels that are more or less bizarre than anything, and you're given 1 life to run through it. World 9-1 and World 9-2 are underwater levels with distorted palettes that allow Mario to swim around all the enemies. World 9-3 is an outside castle that is devoid of almost any enemies or obstacles, outside of a coin heaven that you can repeatedly enter, with the power of creative mode on your side, and the only enemy being Bowser's brother. My guess is that he's been banished here for all eternity for his failure. And World 9-4 is another underwater level that's structured like an enemy roll call, with the only level geometry being Japanese text that translates to saying, "Thank you." Although I really appreciate messages that thank the player, it ultimately doesn't matter if you actually make it here or even beat World 9, because you will simply loop back to the start of World 9 until you game over. But at least you get a message from the staff officially recognizing you as a super player. That's not the only secret world out there, and to unlock 16 more levels, you have to beat the game a total of 8 times, a very tedious process. Thankfully, you are allowed to use warp zones, and the game keeps track of how many times you've beaten the game by representing it through stars on the title card. But keep in mind, this is Lost Levels design getting more opportunities to sabotage your sanity. The worlds themselves are World A, B, C, and D, and they don't introduce or do anything unique beyond just having more insane challenges. Pulling off the infinite 1-up trick is even harder in World A1, because it can only be done with green Koopas, and since they fall off of ledges, it is very easy to mess up. Some levels are just really weird in design, with World B4 being kinda set up like a maze, as the pipes send you back to the beginning, but most of the level is a straight line with no real obstacles. so all those pipes can easily be ignored. Some levels or setups are straight up repeated from the main game, with some levels in World C being stolen from the main game and artificially inflated, with more hazards like lakitus or raised floors that demand extremely tight maneuvers. World D also brings back Bowser's brother, though this one and the Bowser ahead are actually fakes. Good luck bringing a fire flower to expose them, because World D4 gave me a real run for my money. With that big fire bar at the beginning, the precise platformings, and the 2 hammer bros you have to brave through, it took me 14 minutes in the recording to beat it, and thank goodness I did that infinite 1-up trick, because in learning from my mistakes and overcoming the odds, I used up all of my 1-ups. Every fucking one. At the very least, when you clear World 8 or D, you actually get a more fleshed out ending theme, being more triumphant and almost sounding like the Mushroom Kingdom's own wedding march. Princess Peach also gives a more lengthy speech, and the 7 toads that you saved across the game float in the air to bless the new couple, provided you can get so many 1-ups that the entire sequence cuts short. Fun fact, this rendition was planned to be in the first game, but it couldn't be done with the limited space, so I'm glad it was reprised here to make the conclusion to a much harder game more satisfactory. So in the end, I have 9 pros and 21 cons, and it boils down to several things. Despite being a sequel, The Lost Levels is really just a sadistic expansion, and the developers did not realize the consequences of getting carried away with this emphasis on an extreme difficulty. There's a reason why no other Mario game shares the same design philosophy. Granted, there is fun to be had, as it's important to understand that these levels still have thought put into them. It's just taken to such a high limit that I don't feel accomplished about learning and or beating a level, more so than I feel exhausted and dreading the next one. So with that, I'm going to give Super Mario Bros. The Lost Levels a rating of 3 out of 10. Lacking. And that's the end of this video. If you like what you saw, consider giving a like and subscribe to my channel. As per usual, I have my Discord server in the description, so consider joining if you like my content. This video took me a lot longer than I expected to get it uploaded, so I apologize for taking a while on that. Before I work on the next video though, I'll be taking a short break for the next week to work on some school projects. And with that said, I'll be signing off. Take care, folks.